Jim Jim and Carol Thorpe have been ranching in Northeast Guadalupe County since 1999, and that's in Nirkirk, New Mexico. As newcomers to Nirkirk and ranching, they sought knowledge and leveraged resources from many sources, including New Mexico State University, the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association, the Society for Range Management, Quivira Coalition, and many others. They are aided from time to time by their daughter Willa and her husband Nate, and especially their 3 under 7-year-old interns. Jim and Carol are, as they put it, rather passionate about the privileges and responsibilities of sustainable stewardship over the land and livestock under their care. Thank you, Jim. Jim has firsthand experience with the Chicago Climate Exchange, so thanks for sharing your story with us. Jim?
Good morning. I'm going to talk about our experience with the Chicago Climate Exchange, the carbon markets. It's almost like, as Yogi Berra used to say, it's like deja vu all over again. We're talking about possibly range carbon sequestration. Maybe it's an idea that has finally come, or maybe it hasn't. Next slide, please. And we've heard already about the Chicago Climate Exchange. Next slide. And there are various projects to sequester carbon, particularly methane, or methane as the British like to call it, and rangeland soil carbon. Next. In 2007, the Jornada brought the Carbon Market Roadshow up to Guadalupe County, and they had a little introductory session at the ranch. Joe Brown is shown here with the shovel, talking about the very thing about carbon in the soil, how it gets there. To his right, our left, is Bill Salvo. He's a rancher from Maxwell, and he at the time was president of the cattle growers, so he was there in his personal capacity, not representing the organization. Representing the Guadalupe County livestock producers was Bill and Joan Ortiz. They are the couple with their back to us. Off to the right, with his head down, staring at the ground, is Chris Halfstead, then with the Jornada. And on the left is Mark Brunson from Utah State. He's a rangeland social scientist, and he wanted to see how ranchers reacted to this possibility. Next, please. In our living room, turned into a classroom, we learned about many things about range carbon. Incidentally, the man with the yellow hat to Joel's left, that's John Tunberg, who was the state range conservationist for NRCS at the time. Next. So we learned that the potential for storing carbon in New Mexico rangeland on any 1 acre is actually fairly low. But there are very many acres of rangelands in New Mexico, and you put them all together, you might have something you could work with. Next. At the time, it was estimated that it would take 4 to 5 acres of New Mexico rangeland to store 1 metric ton of carbon per year. And as Joel pointed out, these are not accurate measurements, but they're reasonable estimates. It would thus take about 40 to 50,000 acres of New Mexico rangeland to make 1 10,000 ton 5-year contract. Now, not all ranches are 40,000 acres. Ours is about 12,000. But they can be combined with other ranches to make a marketable unit, and you have an entity known as an aggregator to take care of that. And it would include deeded lands, private and state lease lands during the contract, but not federal lands. That was much too complicated at the time, figuring out how the accounting would go. In the case of state lands, it was determined that the state could receive 30%, or roughly a third, of the proceeds once it was all said and done. The commissioner at the time, I believe, was Ray Powell. He was very interested in the possibilities for this. Next, please. Well, a scene like this, one could reasonably say, yeah, there's carbon in that soil. This is productive, and this is something we're shooting for. Next, please. But then something like this, maybe not so much. And this is in March of this year, we just about used up all of our reserve pastures coming into the new year. We're feeding some hay. In this case, we're doing what's called bale feeding. We're putting the hay out on some low-lying areas that hopefully at some point, when they do get rain, will that organic material in the hay, the seed will get mashed in everywhere with the manure, and maybe we'll start rebuilding some forage there. Next, please. We've heard that the sequestration rates are going to vary tremendously from parcel to parcel, but we're going to rely on averages and estimates. And one particularly interest in the Chicago Climate Exchange program was to try to restore degraded rangelands, so bring it back to productivity, improve the soil organic matter, and hopefully sequester some carbon. Next, please. Well, this is an example of an extreme example of a well-grassed forage in the foreground, and perhaps a pasture that maybe has gone too far on the in the forage loss basis. Next, please. At the time, the current trading prices for the rangeland credits were about $1 per acre. They ranged over the course of the program from $7 an acre to 10 cents. Now, after fees, commissions, and costs, the net return to the landowner would be about 80 cents an acre. The aggregators would take 20% of the contract and their overhead and commissions, and as a performance guarantee, 20% of the contract credits and payments were held in reserve for completion of the contract. One lingering question that gave many ranchers who were considering this pause was what would happen in the case of drought. And of course, recent years with a reminder of how drought can come and bite you. Should we fall into non-compliance if we were hit by drought, lost our overgrazed, and would we have to pay all the money back? That was something that was a concern at the time. Now, in order to apply, we had to supply various forms of documentation, including our stocking records. And I'm sorry, I should have said next. Okay, stocking records, next. Next, please. Now I'm trying to coordinate two screens here, so I've gotten ahead. Okay. Okay, stocking records, our ranch plan, next. We participate, next slide, please. We participated through the ECRIP program by increasing our fencing, which facilitates grazing management, next, as well as improving our water systems to help with grazing distribution. This particular picture is on top of a mesa top. We were able to get a drinker and over the ground high density plastic pipeline run with a pump out of a storage tank, so we could provide water to a space that was normally inaccessible and without water. Next, please. Our range monitoring records, and this is a picture of Kurt Godzia, who we had engaged to help do our initial planning and monitoring and setup. And this grazing cage that we put on, those are very helpful, very instructive. Next. So in this picture, I put up one of these cages. There's near a water source before we had done any of our interior fencing. And I noticed after a year that there were perennial grasses that were growing inside the cage, but only annual grasses on the outside. After we had instituted our cross fencing, we were able to notice that and do a rest rotation, give these pastures considerable growing season rest. We were able to replace the annual grasses with perennial grasses. Next. I provided additional comparative monitoring sites that demonstrated the range improvement which were required for the program. Next. Among the best management practices were sustainable stocking rates, rotational grazing, and seasonal use grazing practices initiated on or after January 1st, 1999. We acquired our ranch in February of '99. We took possession in May, so all this fit very well. We could demonstrate that we made improvements because that's where we started from. Next, we've provided our grazing and planting charts and records. Next. And among the other best management practices, we practice body condition scoring, fecal sampling and monitoring at the GAN lab at Texas A&M, and placement of salt and mineral and supplement tubs away from water sources. These particular heifers were part of a grazing distribution study that Derek Bailey, we worked with him on this using some of these supplement blocks. You notice the radio collar on the heifer in the middle. Next. Then brush control is an issue. Most ranchers in eastern New Mexico and elsewhere, they spend a lot of time and money working within EQIP projects or on their own, grubbing, spraying, or burning juniper mesquite. And the question was, well, would that have an effect on carbon sequestration? We hear much about the need to plant more trees, that trees are going to help us combat climate change. Yet here, the ranchers are going around killing trees. What's going on? We wanted to make sure we weren't going to get stung with this. Joe Brown, fortunately, came to the rescue because he explained to us that brush control on rangeland is carbon neutral, and the benefits to rangeland of brush control are well established. Next. So here we had we call it Cottonwood Grove. When we first arrived, it's completely choked with these aggressive one-seeded juniper trees coming up. Fortunately, they could be cut out manually with chainsaw and so forth. They don't resprout. And this area provides habitat for many birds, songbirds, turkeys, bats, and a colony of vultures. They come every year on April 1st and they leave about the end of October. Next. To give an example of how the benefits of brush control on understory, this is on a shallow sandstone soil. These juniper trees we treated with Valpar or hexazinine pellets, and these two sites are only about 15 yards apart. This is from last year, very low rainfall year, very hot. Yet in the treated area, we had a very vigorous understory of galleta and blue grama grass coming back, but with nothing in the treated area. This was inspired by a tour of New Mexico State's ranch at Corona, where I saw some of the research that they've done on juniper, led by Kirk McDaniel, Shad Cox, and others. Next, please. There is a question, can we burn? Will that help with carbon sequestration? This is an example of a study, a demonstration program in the State Land Office in 2007, where they deliberately fired mature trees to see if they got a hot enough fire to kill them, and then compare this treatment with some various chemical treatments, Valpar and Spike, at that time. And it was a very good study, and hopefully the State Land Office will find time to do more of these things as the budget permits. Next, please. This shows the results of the fire. We did get good response after a year and follow-up rains in the area. This is the same site. One thing to notice, however, is around the dead trees, the fire got very hot. The soil became hydrophobic, as they call it, and it still continues to this day. So that's the consideration with the chemical treatments. We find that the grass comes back right away. Next, please. Of course, the juniper shrubs do have value for shade and shelter. What we really want is have a mosaic of plant communities for their different functional purposes. Next. Next, please. So Joel mentioned the difficulties in coming up with credible verification procedures. In practice, it was anticipated that 5% of the properties would be verified in the field. And there was a real problem with the verifiers being uncertain what monitoring techniques should they use. There's a shortage of verifiers. In short, there's a backlog that held up all the applications. Next. So there are about 1,000 ranches, apparently, that participated in the Chicago Climate Exchange range carbon offsets between 2008 and 2010. Almost all of them were up north. I'm going to tell you in Montana, but we did have at least 2 that I know of in New Mexico. So this is the tale of 2 ranches. Notice that they're both in eastern New Mexico. That's because it's primarily a deeded land, but also some state land. The Trigg Ranch was founded in 1918. Next. Next, please. By Steve Trigg. He had come from, oh, go back, please. Back 1 slide, please. So Steve Trigg came from the XIT ranch in, okay, go forward. Sorry. Okay, stay right there. Okay, he came from the XIT ranch in Texas. He brought 22,000 head of cattle. They got 225,000 acres. That was part of the Old Bell Ranch, and they're the real deal. They're the legacy ranch, and the descendants, the third, fourth, and fifth generations, they now manage the ranch. And this is Kristen Holmes and her daughter. Kristen Holmes is the ranch manager. Caitlin on the right is the herd manager. And I think Hillary, the daughter, helps out when she can. Next, please. And the ranch is owned overall by the extended Trigg family, but they put it into a trust, which will keep the ranch going indefinitely. And it's a rather unique arrangement on ownership and management. Most of these large ranches, they get to a certain size, everyone wants out, and they get taken apart again. They're going to keep it going together. Next, please. They all participate in their annual monitoring and other work on the ranch. Next, please. The story of the Trigg Ranch experience with the carbon offsets is well told in this paper, and this is part of the reading list. I encourage anyone who wants to learn more about it in particular to access this. They sold their contract at $1.20, and they netted, after fees and commissions, about $90,000 that they could apply to making further improvements to the ranch. Next. Our little ranch, on the other hand, we made a contract at 27 cents. We netted nothing, because by the time we finally got verified, the whole market collapsed, the politics fell apart, and that was the end of that. However, we're not totally disappointed, because all the things we were supposed to do, we were kind of doing anyway, and they all were beneficial to our working landscape. Next. And one of the big lessons that we've all learned the last several years, it doesn't matter how much carbon we put into the ground. As Joel noted, that the rainfall, the weather drives everything. Climate trumps everything. This is the most recent drought monitor map of the West. Doesn't look good. Slowly getting better, but we're in such a big hole. I don't know how we're going to dig ourselves out regionally. There were sometimes last year we collected more flies in our rain gauge than we did rain. We had about a total of just barely 5 inches of rain last year for a 14-inch rainfall region. Next. And when your cows, no matter how good they look and how well they can manage, have nothing to eat, they just can't stay. It's time to sell your mama cows. We cut our herd down over the last couple of years by about 1/3. Next. The Triggs, they brought the first Angus cattle into New Mexico. We figured they have about 50 generations at least of cattle on their place. We're all adapted to it, and they've cut down by about a half. And Sally Trigg told me that when they had to sell the replacement heifers, couldn't keep them last year, they just all sat down on the ground and bawled as the trucks flew away. Next. So what is the view ahead? How are we going to see into the future, prepare for what challenges the climate brings, sustain our landscapes, our cattle, our businesses, our families, and our communities? Next. Well, of course, we always need to try to manage our climate risk. And there are some programs out there from the USDA Risk Management Agency, which involves some measure of backup in terms of ensuring for the rainfall that you normally get. These programs have not been perfect, in part because there's a lack of reliable rain gauges that are reporting into the system, official automated rain gauges. Apparently they cost about, I don't know, $20,000 each or something. There was a bill in the legislature. We were trying last year to get more of these reporting stations online. It didn't get too far. But to give you an example, Fort Sumner, they're keyed into a rain station in Rio Doce. And we know that Rio Doce gets a lot more rain than Fort Sumner. But in any event, we need to have more accurate rain gauges reporting. I think New Mexico Department of Agriculture is aware of this, and to whatever extent any policymakers, program people that are listening can help make this happen, that would really be helpful. More helpful than talking about putting carbon in the soil, because we need to be able to control our climate risk and anticipate it and react to it. Next, please. There are also many tools out there. In 2007, I was able to work with the BLM office in Las Cruces. They were piloting some technologies using NDVI satellite images at both the county scale. Next. And interestingly, at the ranch scale, they were able to make a map of my pastures and pose it over these, I think these were 1 kilometer pixels, and they would show the percent of normal vegetation index almost in real time, and it matched up. If you look at the arrows, the picture on the left, it's very green. We had an isolated big rainstorm right in that area. The grass responded. Was just to the north, it hadn't rained very much. These type of satellite mapping tools, I think, can be really useful. We need to figure out whose closet they're stuck in and how to get them back out where we can access them. Next. This is again is an example of how the satellite imagery can correlate to what's on the ground. Next, please. We're able to take part in a study which was promoted by the Western Landowners Alliance and funded by the Thornburg Foundation to test some technology. And this paper should be on the reading list too. Next, please. Where they use very high resolution digital imagery, taking of a well-defined plot of ground, and this is what the image looked like. One thing that stands out very well is the amount of cover and of bare ground. And what they were doing, they were getting the satellite to, or the software to have the satellite imagery and the ground imagery to integrate and calibrate to each other, so you can monitor, take these measurements at large scales and find them to be reliable. And again, this is something that I would encourage whoever is writing grants or making these things happen to make this continue. Next, please. All along, we've had a great deal of assistance that many of our neighbors and other ranches from the NRCS So the Conservation Stewardship Program, the EQIP program, those are all very been helpful to us. I wanted to give a shout out to our our conservation out of the Santa Rosa office, Lucas Montano. I guess you just get his name. Okay, please go forward. Our folks, us folks who are out on the ground, we'd like to see additional practices become eligible for NRCS programs and funding. One that's particularly promising is laser leveled toe slope keyline contouring, which can promote infiltration and volunteer native revegetation on some of our slopes. I think this is exciting, even on a pilot basis. This would be great. Next, please. And then there are additional ways of trying to stabilize and divert erosion channels to where they can produce more, get the water run off to where it can produce vegetation, not just run off to your neighbors. There are ways to put all these excess junipers they're trying to get rid of, put them into these gullies to catch soil sediments. They will raise the, when they flood, the wetted zone, expand the green zone in these areas, and help heal some of these gullies. And one question I have, we've approached the State Title Committee in the past to see if we can do these things, and we're told, oh no, they have to last 100 years. Well, do they really have to last 100 years? Maybe we can come up with ways to make that work better. Next, please. And these practices, many of them are inspired by Bill Zedike. He gave a road work presentation at our ranch back in 2003. And you notice all the cowboy hats, the rancher hats there. They're there because they're interested and they want to take these things and try them at home. Next, please. There are several publications by the Trigg Coalition that explain all these different techniques and practices, and they're available at their website. And I would encourage everyone to look at these and see if we can't get these practices instituted into the regular NRCS program. Next. Finally, I'd like to ask our research agencies to make some useful climate predictions on our rangeland communities. What are we going to expect? What are, for the ecological site descriptions, what are likely future plant communities? How might we as managers prepare for and influence these shifts? Next. And then we need to remember to incorporate our local place-based knowledge. The people here at the Romero Homestead, that was our ranch about over 100 years ago. And many of their descendants are not far from here, and I've learned a lot from them about how the land is managed, how it has changed over the years. Next, please. One of the best little resources is the small book called We Fed Them Cactus, which is about the Hispanic pioneering on this area and the things that they learned, not just the culture, the history, but also their land management practices. And the author, Fabiola Cabeza de Vaca, taught school not too far from our ranch back in those days. Next, please. If we are going to have more of these climate initiatives, this is a good article to consult. It really goes into the depths of the challenges, the opportunities, the implications of getting ranchers involved with conservation projects, and particularly the carbon markets. Next, please. We also want to remember to involve all the stakeholders, especially those who are practicing land stewards. Next, please. Finally, rather than just trying to do discrete programs to sequester carbon or to save an endangered species, we need to integrate all these conservation program initiatives to achieve shared holistic goals. And finally, next, let's please stop all this righteous rhetoric. Ruminants are not ruining our planet. Thank you.